Vishal. We are welcoming you all on behalf of the second FP Lecture Series 2016. Today we have Jelena Salmi, and she is a PhD candidate in the Department of History and Ethnology at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland. And her doctorate is a very unique kind of study, which is very useful for all of you to really see this presentation, because she's talking about that how the displaced and resettled slum dwellers in Ahmedabad are appropriating their space, which pushes them to the fringes of urban life. And she's been quite active in the kind of varieties of researches on informal economy, urban renewal, and theory of space and places. She's an anthropologist by training, and having studied perception and practices related to the child marriage in the rural Rajasthan in collaboration with a local NGO at Jyväskylä. She is currently a visiting scholar in the Faculty of Planning at several universities. Today she is going to talk about mobilization of difference in a slum resettlement site in Ahmedabad. So please give a big hand to Jelena for her lecture.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here at CEPT University. I want to thank the Faculty of Planning for the possibility to have this talk, and of course all of you for coming here after such a long day of studying. In what follows, I will talk about the preliminary findings of my PhD thesis, which is an ethnographic study on how displaced and resettled slum dwellers in Ahmedabad construct their identities in an effort to claim presence in the city and to succeed in negotiations with the government. I must mention that my analysis is still under progress, so I very much appreciate all the critique that you might have after this talk. So I will begin this talk with a very brief introduction into the making of sanitized spaces. After that, I will present an overview of my field, which is the Sadbhavna Nagar resettlement site in Vatva, and discuss some of the problems that the residents have had to face after their displacement to the urban margins. I will then introduce the concept of worlding, followed by a look into a certain type of nostalgia and how it contributes to the construction of difference. After that, I will move on to the core of this presentation, namely the mobilization of supposed cultural or moral differences in an effort to access resources, to influence government policy, and to construct the self as worthy of world-class citizenship. I will approach this subject through concrete ethnographic examples from the resettlement site of Sadbhavna Nagar. Finally, I will present my conclusions. I think that I will talk for about 40 to 45 minutes, 45 maximum, and then we'll have some time for discussion. But before I begin, I will tell you a little bit about my methods. Since I'm an anthropologist, this is essentially a local, very grounded story. My thesis is based on 10 months fieldwork in the resettlement site of Sadbhavna Nagar. I lived in a middle-class housing society located next to that area, so I was able to interact with the residents on a daily basis. I did about 60 semi-structured interviews with the residents, and also had hundreds of more informal discussions, which I actually found more useful method because they were more open and relaxed. I mean, the residents have had to answer all kinds of surveys in the displacement and resettlement process, so understandably they were kind of sick of it. but informal discussions over a cup of tea or whatever proved to be a more natural way to gather information. On top of that, I did participant observation in the form of taking part in various community festivals, by accompanying people to their working places, and by just spending time outside in street corners and squares and conversing. And on top of that, I also took photographs and video, and at some point I'm planning to edit a short ethnographic documentary on those videos. In India, the neoliberal logic, combined with a growing political visibility of new consumption-oriented middle classes, manifests itself most strikingly in the form of large-scale development projects. These projects aim at beautification and sanitization of urban space, and at attracting investments and stimulating economic growth. There's a desire to create clean and green world-class cities. What's interesting is the new aesthetic mode of governing. Constructions, as well as people that do not fit the imagined world-class city, are recast as non-ideological problems in need of clear-cut technical solutions. As Asher Gardner writes, the making of world-class cities is not instantiated solely or even primarily through an economic calculus of cost-benefit or through a judicial redefinition of property. Rather, it also takes shape through the dissemination of a compelling vision of the future. And this vision is what Asher Gardner calls world-class aesthetic. Large development projects are seen as positive steps that support national ideologies of development. They are projects that go hand in hand with the world-class city vision. At the same time, slums and their residents are portrayed as nuisances that need to be removed from the central spaces. Public spaces are reclaimed for the use of so-called proper citizens in the name of public interest. While displacements are increasingly pushing the poor to the urban fringes. This happens in Delhi, this happens in Mumbai, and this happens in Ahmedabad as well. For example, slum dwellers that used to occupy the banks of the Sadbhavna River, seen on this picture, have been resettled in 18 different slum resettlement sites built all over the city. That is, if a person has filled the criteria for resettlement and has managed to produce all the required documents. However, resettlement has caused many problems, and it seems that development has in fact left the affected communities even worse off than they were before. For example, Patel, Sluses, and Mathur have shown that displacement under the Sabarmati project has led to loss of jobs and social networks, increased travel expenses, and health problems, among other things. According to the scholars, many of these things are at least partly attributable to the exclusion of the riverfront dwellers from the planning and implementation of the project. So in this photo, you can see the demolition of a riverfront slum close to Ellisbridge. I'm sure many of you recognize this landscape. The photo was taken in the year 2011. In it, you can see the slum dwellers packing their belongings into rickshaws. Next, an overview of my field. The Sadbhavna Nagar resettlement site was built under the basic services to the urban poor, which is a component of the city modernization scheme Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission. It was constructed in 2010, and it houses both Hindu and Muslim slum dwellers, which have been displaced by the Sabarmati project, the Kankaria Lakefront Development Project, road widenings, and the BRTS. Sadbhavna Nagar is one of the 7 resettlement sites located in Vatva, which is in the southeastern margins of the city, about 12 kilometers from the city center. You can see the approximate location in this map. The area is connected to the city by railway and by the AMTS bus network, but at least most people in Sadbhavna Nagar prefer to use shared auto rickshaws as a transportation mode. The people of the resettlement site come from various different neighborhoods. They have been lumped together from different places at different times, and this procedure has created an atmosphere of fear and mistrust as residents have to live with previously unknown people. Many people who live in Sadbhavna Nagar have relatives in other sites. Families have been scattered all around the city, and at the same time, former slum leaders have lost their power. Muslims and Hindus have mostly been resettled in different resettlement sites, even in those cases where people of a mixed community neighborhood by the river requested to be resettled together. Sadbhavna Nagar is an exception since it houses both communities. Now, for the urban poor, living among one's relatives is often the only way to secure social and political capital. Kinship networks are also important for livelihood strategies. Therefore, a new Bakka house in the urban periphery hardly compensates for the loss of social relations. When I talked with the residents of Sadbhavna Nagar, they often asked me a rhetorical question: what do we do with a house when there's nothing else? Sadbhavna Nagar also houses people who aren't directly affected by development projects. To use Tone Huse's term, there are also people affected by displacement by debarment. Displacement by debarment refers to a phenomenon whereby the poor are forced to move out of the gentrified areas of the city because they simply cannot afford the rents. In the Sadbhavna Nagar area, you can rent an apartment for just 1,000 or 1,500 rupees a month, although illegally, as the residents are not allowed to sell or rent out their apartments in the period of 10 years. During that period, they are supposed to pay the sum of 66,900 rupees. After that, the property will be put in their name. But still, some people have chosen to illegally rent out their apartments or even sell them, and themselves, they have moved closer to the city center. Sadbhavna Nagar consists of 77 four-story concrete blocks, which is why the residents call them Charmalia, 4 stories. Each block contains 32 two-bedroom apartments. Apartment blocks are connected to each other by open spaces and by paved streets. Sadbhavna Nagar is the biggest resettlement area in Vatva. It contains 2,464 flats in an area of about 7.5 hectares, so it's quite densely populated. In local street lingo, it is known as Hindustan and is contrasted with the adjacent Muslim-dominated resettlement site of Vasant Gajendra Katkarnagan, known less formally as Pakistan. In this map, borders inside the Sadbhavna Nagar area are marked with red color. The Vatva flyover, seen in the right corner of the slide, functions as a borderline between the so-called Hindustan and Pakistan. So Pakistan is here on the right side and Hindustan on the left side. A police chowki, police station circled in blue on the map, was constructed on the border about 2 years ago after frequent communal clashes. Next, I will take a brief look into the concept of worlding, which I apply in this presentation to understand how resettled people engage with the vision of the world-class city, often in contradictory ways. Anthropologist Aihwa Ong defines worlding non-ideologically as situated everyday practices as political speculations about the possible future of the city. Worlding practices articulate disparate, both global and local elements, and they cannot be mapped out in advance as being on the side of power or on the side of resistance. They can range from massive development projects to everyday politics of residents, including subjective claims to urban space and citizenship. Importantly, the making of world-class city is also a worlding of subjects, a taking up of the world-class aesthetic by urban residents desiring a new future. Gerdner writes that the world-class aesthetic operates as a contested area, allowing subjects to fashion new political demands and visions. Gerdner locates slum residents' political agency at the intersection of how they partake in both ruling and being ruled. On the one hand, they take up aspirations that the world-class aesthetic sets before them. On the other hand, they might mobilize this aesthetic for different ends. Thus, slum residents' appropriation of world-class aesthetic can be both consent and resistance at the same time. During my fieldwork in Sadbhavna Nagar, I paid attention to how residents frequently used the past to criticize the present condition. Nostalgic stories relating to the previous places of residence portrayed peaceful, centrally located neighborhoods. Life was pleasant, harmonious, and people could even feel a sense of pride over living in the city center. As many residents stated, everything was close by and people helped each other, whereas life in Vatva is infused by feelings of fear, insecurity, and marginalization. I suggest that nostalgic reconstructions of the past can be seen as discursive confrontations, as worlding practices, not just sentimental longings for the past. Gupta and Ferguson write that imagined place, homeland, is one of the most powerful unifying symbols for displaced or dispersed peoples. I argue that displacement has actually strengthened people's attachment to places, politicizing their collective identities of this or that slum. The nostalgia invoked by the residents of Sadbhavna Nagar is a means of identity reconstruction and at the same time a reassertion of social boundaries in the context of marginalization. Through the reinforcement of emotional bonds between community and its positively evaluated past, nostalgia challenges the present condition. I argue that nostalgia expressed by the displaced is not so much a desire to return to those particular riverfront neighborhoods and those kacha huts that no longer exist, but a desire to be included in the world-class city and the bright future that it promises. It is a nostalgia for a sense of future, as Battaglia says. As one interviewee told me, At the riverfront, we could even feel a sense of pride in living. We were poor, but at least we were in the city. Some people spoke of their previous places of residence as golden land. I argue that city center slums' central position in the matrix of relationships provided a feeling of connectedness to the world, which, besides offering livelihood opportunities, was a source of confidence and pride. Displacement disrupted this feeling. A resettlement site is not a slum. It's an official residential area constructed by the local government. Still, the resettlement site of Sadbhavna Nagar is often spoken of as if it was a slum, and the residents are often referred to as slum-dwellers. In fact, the residents themselves often use middle-class aesthetic discourse to characterize their new neighborhood. They say, for example, that we want to live in a good, clean locality. We want to live in the city with good people, not in this dirty slum with useless people, third-class people, or even garbage people. Last Sunday, I was sitting in an auto rickshaw on my way to the launch of Esther David's new book on Ahmedabad, and the driver was from Sadbhavna Nagar, but I didn't know him previously. It was the first time we met. So on the way, we started talking, and he mentioned that he doesn't like to live in Charmalia because of third-class citizens that live there. So, and third-class low people that live there. Significantly, he said both of these words, third class and low, in English. So I asked him if he knew some English, considering that he used those words. But he was confused and said that, no, those are Gujarati words, very common Gujarati words. Well, fair enough, I said, and asked what he meant by the term third class. Why are people called third class people? He answered that the term is used to characterize people who use impolite language, talk too loudly, pick up fights, drink liquor, throw garbage from their windows instead of using a garbage bin, steal things, and try to haggle the price of auto rickshaw rides. He said that he prefers to socialize with the Acche Insan, good people, who talk politely and pay according to the meter. Well, I said, looking for the right words, I think you can find many good people in Sadbhavna Nagar as well, don't you think? But he disagreed and said that good people are only found in areas like Vastrapur, Bhopal, and Satellite. And that's why he prefers to drive his rickshaw there instead of the eastern side of the city. What's interesting is that the terms that he used, third-class people and low people, are the same negative remarks that people from the neighboring middle-class area in Vatva, the area where I live, used to characterize all the residents of the resettlement site. So this auto rickshaw driver had internalized the nuisance talk very well. It seems that property ownership is seen as a prerequisite for world-class citizenship, and the people of Sadbhavna Nagar appreciate the possibility of becoming house owners, but they dislike the area and the fact that they were excluded from decision-making concerning issues that affect them. The cloud of uncertainty surrounding the provision of basic services makes them even more vulnerable. This picture was taken in May last year when a gas cylinder exploded in one of the flats and a fire broke out. It took more than 40 minutes for the fire brigade to arrive. By that time, the whole flat had burned down. And people saw this as one more proof of the government's indifference towards the poor people. So the people of Sadbhavna Nagar feel that they have not been given a place in the world-class city. On the contrary, they have been shut out of it, and I quote, thrown into the jungle. They experience the city in terms of exclusion and marginalization instead of participation. There's no place for the poor in the megacity, as one interviewee said. On the other hand, even though the residents feel sad about having lost their homes, paradoxically, many of them seem to support the development projects, saying that it's a good thing Modi created clean spaces at Kankaria and the Sabarmati River. Significantly, both of these projects are strongly personified around the now Prime Minister. I think it's fair to say that their accounts concerning the world-class city vision are quite ambivalent. On the one hand, they resent the fact that they have been excluded from it. On the other hand, it's a source of an object of desire. I suggest that the residents' use of middle-class aesthetic discourse can be seen as an effort to show that they are on the side of development, that they want to be included, and that they are proper citizens, just like anybody else. Appropriation of middle-class nuisance talk, as Asher Gerdner calls it, is a means to claim presence in the city. But instead of collectively questioning the government policy that has led to loss of livelihoods and social networks, as well as the lack of basic services in the area, the residents resort to factionalism based on religion, caste, or locality. In what follows, I will argue that disruptive resettlement policy has contributed to the politicization of these identities, which are then articulated both discursively and spatially. I'm now going to give you one example of resettled people's quest for space purified of difference. In the middle of Sadbhavna Nagar, there are 9 blocks which have been allotted to people that used to live in Machibir, Kankaria. You can see the area on this map circled with a blue line. The people of Machibir have been allotted houses in 3 different areas. One of them is Tikampura, located a few kilometers from Vatva. One of them is another resettlement area in Vatva called Kushapau Nagar, and one of them is Sadbhavna Nagar. The Machibir people are all Hindus from different castes. They were among the first people to arrive at the resettlement site, and according to their own reports, the atmosphere was fine in the beginning. It was only after 2 years had passed that problems started to arise. The Machibirians account for the change of atmosphere by pointing to the arrival of Muslims from Kanpur Darwaja. They say that after Muslims were allotted houses next to them, activities such as drinking liquor, using drugs, gambling, looting, and throwing garbage became more common. Put bluntly, the Machibir people blame their Muslim neighbors, saying that they brought all the bad habits with them. They don't feel safe anymore and are concerned over their children's future. There's no quality education and no livelihood opportunities available. As you can see from this map, hopefully you can see it, the open space in the middle of the Machibir area is completely empty. Nothing has been built there. It's because they refused to embrace this new neighborhood. You can also see that the Machibir people's area is surrounded by so-called mixed blocks. They are marked with color lime or light green. These mixed blocks are blocks that are inhabited by both Hindus and Muslims. This fact further contributes to their anxiety. They are sort of stuck on an island in the middle of a sea of strangers. So, to handle this issue, all the former residents of the Machibir slum have collectively approached the AMC as well as the state government in order to be given apartments together in one place in an all-Hindu area. So far, the negotiations have been unsuccessful, the local government saying that you have been allotted houses and that's that. But the people remain hopeful. The last time that I talked to one of their representatives, he said that he has now started approaching the media and opposition parties. So for these Machibir people, the other is the generalized Muslim, which is hardly surprising considering the history of communal violence and the general residential segregation in Ahmedabad, as well as the current political atmosphere. Anti-Muslim remarks are quite common in the area, especially among the people from Gankaria who used to live in all Hindu localities. However, even some of those Hindus who lived in mixed neighborhoods by the river Sabarmati blame the Muslims for the bad atmosphere, although this happens less frequently. In those riverfront neighborhoods, people knew each other individually. Muslims were not first and foremost Muslims, and Hindu neighbors were not first and foremost Hindus. Firm relationships had been established over many years of living together, whereas in Sadbhavna Nagar, people have been thrown together with previously unknown people. So these negative remarks are therefore directed towards the generalized phantasmagoric Muslim, not actual people. They are an attempt to distance the self from undesired characteristics and to preserve the unity of their community. Then another example. In the left corner of this picture, you can see a wall. On the left side of the wall, there's Sadbhavna Nagar and 4 blocks inhabited by a Hindu upper caste community. On the right side, there's a slum called Ambikatubnichali, and behind the slum, there are new unallotted BSUP houses. The slum houses Adivasi migrants from Madhya Pradesh. Many of them sell liquor, and police frequently goes there to collect bribes. There are also several fish and chicken shops along this road. Now, the upper caste Hindus who live behind the wall don't like the slum on the opposite side of the road. They also resent the fact that meat is being sold close to their apartments. Moreover, they say that thieves can easily jump over the wall. There have been a few cases of theft in the past. Thieves are clearly equated with the opposite slum. The slum is also seen as an aesthetic nuisance, just like the slums of the riverfront and Gankaria were seen as nuisance by the middle classes and the government. A group of young men that did some voluntary work for the BJP during the municipal elections last year asked a return favor from the ruling party. They asked for the wall separating their blocks from the road to be heightened in order to prevent visual contact between the bottom floor residents and the meat vendors, as well as the slum dwellers, and also to make it more difficult to jump over the wall. A local municipal councillor has promised to fulfill their wish. So this community's newly established property citizenship equips them with a self-conceived right to make these kinds of negative comments about slum dwellers. What's interesting is that the upper caste community did not refer to the caste or religion of slum dwellers and meat vendors, but talked about aesthetic nuisance and differences in eating habits and behavior. An existing cultural marker, vegetarianism, was transformed into a political symbol and coupled with a middle-class aesthetic discourse. By making such statements, these people locate themselves on the side of proper citizens and claim moral superiority. Moreover, by heightening the wall between themselves and the slum dwellers, the community strives to spatialize identity, to carve this difference into space. Then one example from mixed blocks, and this is the final example. The 5 blocks seen here on the map are inhabited by both Hindus and Muslims that come from Azad Nagar, Kodiyar Nagar, and Mahakalina Chapra. The majority of the people are Muslims. In these blocks, the difference is constructed between groups defined on the basis of locality rather than religion or caste. They think more in the lines of residents of these 5 blocks are good, hard-working people, but people from other areas drink, gamble, use drugs, don't understand the importance of cleanliness, and so on. So that's why they keep distance to other people. Like one woman said, we don't go to their area and they don't come to our area. Due to internal solidarity, the people of these 5 blocks are also able to work as a community to lobby for their rights. They have, for example, demanded the government to provide them pipes for the construction of a community water tap. The water taps that were provided by the government are all located next to Hindu majority blocks. They have also built a mosque indicated on the map with a green rectangle, and they run a madrasa. They clean the area collectively every Sunday and keep drinkers out. They don't rent their apartments to outsiders, but only to relatives and former neighbors to ensure that no bad people move in. But still, they are worried over the future. I recently talked to a young Muslim woman who lives in the area, and she has two small children, and the family is now building a new house close to Sarkej because the parents are afraid that once the children grow up a bit, they will get sucked into illegal activities. They think that the bad atmosphere of Sadbhavna Nagar will affect their children and ruin their future. And this view was shared by very many people. If they have the economic means, they are planning to move out of this area. Finally, conclusions. Arjun Appadurai writes that the creation of settlements by decree or by overt use of force creates severe constraints, even obstacles for the survival of the locality. Disruptive resettlement policy undermines not just the livelihood strategies of the poor, but also their foundation for political power. This can be seen as a deliberate act from the part of the local government to undermine the urban poor. As I said, people talk a lot about how good life was in the city center slums, and they feel nostalgic about that time. There's a clear desire to live with one's affinity groups. As Neiman writes, the formation of spatial communities is a basic survival strategy in what is otherwise a hostile urban jungle. It is the social capital, the security, and the sense of belonging that the displaced long for and mourn over, because those are the basis for a better future. Resettlement to a new environment among strangers made them vulnerable. The desire to live among one's caste, religious group, or locality-based group is thus more a reaction and an effort to secure space and livelihood in a vulnerable situation than a sign of an innate feeling of irreconcilable cultural differences between social groups. Construction of difference is a political act. An extreme example on the politics of difference is a quest for complete purification and exclusion of difference, as in the case of the Machibir people, who make a razor-sharp boundary between themselves and the others. What's new is that the construction of difference has been influenced by middle-class aesthetic discourse. Remarks such as third-class citizens, thieves, useless people, dirty area, slum-dwellers, and so on, are used by resettled people to portray oneself and one's group as proper citizens. This is often done in the lines of caste, religion, or locality, giving new political significance to those divisions. Mobilization of difference is thus also a strategic effort to reimagine the self as worthy of world-class citizenship, to claim presence in the city. The downside is that the construction of difference hinders the formation of a class-based political movement among the displaced. As a concluding note, I suggest that neoliberal governance has increased the marginalization of the urban poor in India, but at the same time, it has opened up possibilities for new kinds of identity politics in the urban margins. Thank you. I will stop here. And now I'd be very happy to hear your comments, criticism, question.
Sadbhavna Nagar. Did you think that the decisions to break these traditional communities were deliberate or negligent or uninformed? Because they can be any of those things or a mixture. But from your mapping, it seems as if it were very defined efforts to segregate or break traditional boundaries. So I'm just interested in what was the system that was used to make those decisions to place people in these locations?
Yeah, there were different kinds of systems for different projects. In the case of the Sabarmati project, the resettlement was done in 5 different phases, and there was no clearly articulated resettlement and rehabilitation policy in the beginning. So the resettlement was based on, there was no policy. So people, yeah, and the resettlement was done in 5 different phases with a computer-generated random drawing of lots that you go here and you go there and you go another area. So that's how the communities were broken. But in the case of Kankaria and BRTS, the people were first sent to Pipledge, close to Pirana garbage dump. And each household was given 5,000 rupees that they were supposed to use to build a hut there next to the garbage dump. And they had to live there for 5 years before they were given the apartments. But these people were resettled in groups, not all together, but still that there was one big group, and then it was divided into 4 parts, for example. So that's how this, for example, these 9 blocks in the middle of the area, they have been resettled as a group, whereas the areas around that, they have been given the randomized drawing of lots.
Absolutely fascinating. Politically, how do you think, politically, do you think that AMC could have housed all the groups together based on caste, based on community? Or what was the political sort of dimension to this and the political rhetoric about sort of, secular-based decision? How did you find responses to that? I think I know the answer to the question, but I just wonder about that, what was going on at the time.
I think that they could have done it on the community basis, like the Sadbhavna dwellers asked, but they didn't do it because they were in such a hurry to carry out with the Sadbhavna development project. They wanted to start constructing, so the resettlement was based on, there was a lot of grassroots resistance and court orders, and the project went on despite those. They went on destructing, the demolitions went on despite those things. So if they had wanted, they could have resettled them on the community basis, but they didn't want to. No, actually there have been more health problems. In the beginning, the water came from underground bore wells, and it was of very bad quality, which resulted in kidney stones. And even now it has been, it's the municipal water, but still many people complain that the water is not drinkable. And then another health problem is that after losing livelihoods, young men don't have nothing to do. So they have started drinking a lot, using drugs, and this leads to violence, but also health problems, domestic violence, communal violence. And also the closest hospital is about 5 kilometers away, and the residents complain that when they dial what's the number, 118, it takes so long time for the ambulance to come that people have died on the way to the hospital.
In the context of from where these people were relocated, that's one of it was the Sadbhavna Nagar and another was Auditorium. Suppose the Sadbhavna Nagar project was not to be developed and after their resettlement was not to be taken up. Still, these locations were not the best locations for people to live because they're on the river front, they're on the river where it gets flooded every alternate year, every single year it will get flooded and house will be washed out. Similarly, in Auditorium and other areas, because there were no lake areas, so it filled with water and the house. So it is, I don't know whether we can say it is for their benefit that their relocation happened. Maybe the process, there's a question about the process. But the fact that relocation, is there an overall positive, is there an overall benefit to the residents? And secondly, because these locations, like for example the Sadbhavna Nagar, it is in the middle of industrial area.
Yes.
And most of these people, when they were living on the riverfront and other locations, they were people who were employed in casual labor. It's not they had an office job next to the place where they live. because that is an industrial area, and that is how the resettlement was done, when locating them wherever, of course, wherever AMC had land, government land was available, and second was where there would be employment opportunities.
Yes.
So, how would you?
Well, several residents have complained that they don't have the required skills for the factory job in the chemical factories. So they say that they are not given jobs there, or they are paid less than other workers. Especially Muslims have complained of discrimination in GIDC Vatva area. Most people prefer to go on with their previous jobs, which were located in the city center, so they travel daily to the previous places of work in shuttle autos or by two-wheelers if they have them. And it has had the most negative impact on the employment of women, because women used to work as maids. Many of the women used to work as maids in middle-class households in the city center, and now they are unable to find that work in Vatva. There are middle-class areas, but the wages are lower, and everyone is just not able to find job at all. Whereas traveling to the city center would take too much of their time if they have small children. In the riverfront, they could leave their children with their neighbors, but in Sadbhavna Nagar, since there's a lack of trust, people are scared of their neighbors, they cannot do that. They are afraid that someone will enter the house. So especially many women have dropped out of work completely.
So as per your view, the perfect settlement strategy should be like they should not shift permanently at this, say like Sadbhavna Nagar in other places, but they should be shifted temporarily. And then instead of staying all those people at temporary location, they should again come back to their original location. Because what happens is riverfront, they are selling those lands to corporates. And the original owner of those settlement holders have to suffer at Sadbhavna Nagar. So what is your view? Is it right strategy to shift those people permanently to alternate location, or they should be shifted temporarily and then they should again come back to original position after development?
Well, in situ resettlement would be definitely the best option, but also if people are taken, if their opinions are taken into consideration when planning and implementing the project, it could also be an area which is a little bit further away, so that the ones who implement the project should have some knowledge over their livelihoods. Where do they work? What kind of work do they do? So that these areas could be designed as a whole, not just give them houses and now we're finished. So those two possibilities, in my opinion.
Have you studied the Lakhudi area, resettlement things? Because in Lakhudi area, what happens, they are given houses at the same places. Temporarily they are from some other places, but they are at the same places after construction of new homes and there.
I'm not familiar with it, but has it been successful?
I'm not aware of, but since I have thought that you have studied all these things, if you can study the Lakhudi area resettlement project, then you will have a clear idea whether they should shift it temporarily or they should shift it permanently.
Lakhudi
area, yes. Lakhudi Talab is nearby, it's a sports club area.
Okay. Thank you. I'll look into that. Well, for example, Renu Desai from the Center for Urban Equity has written a very detailed report on this procedure. Actually, I have references here at the end of my presentation, so if you're interested, you can take a look at that. It's the third one. Personally, no, but when Renu was conducting her research, she interviewed many of the officials of AMC. there hasn't been any regeneration of jobs, but two NGOs, SAT and Mahila Housing Seva Trust, took the initiative of forming resident welfare associations, which would be responsible for the upkeep of the infrastructure in the area. And those associations would have been formed on the basis of a shared underground water tank. So for example, if 7 blocks share a common water source, those 7 residents of those 7 blocks would form the residential welfare associations. But because these people don't form naturally a community, it has been very difficult for those NGOs to form these kind of associations. People don't trust each other. They refuse to contribute money because they think that, well, this president of this association is just going to put it into his own pocket. And also because they now have to travel long distances to the city center for work, they simply don't have time to participate in these kinds of activities. And also because they feel betrayed by the part of the AMC. They feel that AMC doesn't address their grievances. They feel reluctant to pay something themselves. They think that, well, the AMC has to provide us first these things. After that, we will start doing something about this. So mainly due to lack of community, it has been actually impossible to form these resident welfare associations in the area.
Are you trying to say that this is not what the public wanted? I mean, this is not what the dwellers, the slum-dwellers want. They didn't want a rehabilitation. Is that what you're trying to say?
Can you repeat?
I mean, are you trying to say that the rehabilitation or the relocation, that is not what the public or the slum-dwellers wanted? Are you trying to say that?
Am I trying to say that the rehabilitation was not what the slum dwellers wanted? Well, I think that they are happy with the project and the resettlement and the possibility of becoming house owners. But what they don't want is that they have been excluded from the decision-making concerning issues that affect them. So, in my view, they don't have anything against resettlement, but as the riverfront dwellers say, that they were promised that they would be resettled within 2 to 3 kilometers of the previous place of residence. And now they feel betrayed that instead of that, it's now 12 kilometers. So they don't protest against resettlement per se, but just the distance and that no attention has been paid to maintaining livelihoods.
According to what I know, in BSUP, they have, in intermediate, when the project is proposed, they have discussion with the community. So they always they always have discussion with the community. They take their requirement, then they proceed with the project. So community participation is involved in BSUP projects. So at this stage, how can you say that they never had an interaction?
In the case of the Sabarmati project, they didn't get the information. They were not involved. In fact, some of the people had to read from newspapers what's going to happen. So for some reason in this case, their opinions have not been taken into consideration. But Renu Desai writes a lot about this in her research.
What is the positive outcome of this resettlement things? Any key positive things?
Well, some people have been able to start good business in the resettlement area, running shops. And also it has benefited the liquor sellers and all kinds of goons. That cannot be mentioned, maybe a positive effect, but only in an individual level. But when I have asked the residents to say, to express what's positive about this project, they have said that nothing at all, nothing is positive. It has only destroyed our lives.
So is it the questionnaire, design of questionnaire in such a way that it's not pop-up and make it a questionnaire in a positive angle? So was it the issue, or is it really the beneficiary are saying that nothing is positive? Because few of the settlement is very excellent location, very good. They could have more livelihood options in the few of the settlements. I agree in the few of the settlements which is very bad and the infrastructure is not accessed when the settlement has been done. But it is unfair to say that as a global level, as a global Ahmedabad, everything there is no positive at all. So it is good to have a balanced one where something which is very positive, something which is not negative but need to improve. So what is your opinion on that? How do you rate the positive reflection and the negative reflection where the more improvement is required?
I'm not aware of what's the situation in other BSUP areas in Ahmedabad. I'm under the impression that in some of them the resettlement has been more successful and the people are able to take over the infrastructure. But that's in those cases where they were resettled closer to their homes, previous homes. So that's the most essential factor, the distance and maintaining social relations.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
We'll discuss later.
Going back to your plan, just a few slides back, if you were to go back after the 10 years has passed, when people are then in total control of their houses, how do you think spatially the communities would be arranged? Do you think it would be very different from what you see here, based on communities?
Well, it might be that people start moving out if they have the possibility to do so. Those who have definitely will move out. But, well, I think that there's also the possibility that people just get used to living with each other and form a community after some years. One Muslim boy said that I see it as a possibility that after 40 years we will feel like we're the same, we're a community. Don't know, we'll see.
I think this is the last question.
It's really more an observation, which might be interesting. At the moment, the study is focusing very much on this area and within the context of the river. But the answer to a lot of the questions about whether people should move 12 meters or 3 kilometers, I think is within the proposal for the riverfront. If you look at all of the land which is freed for commercial development along the river, one might consider that these communities could have been settled incrementally closer to where they lived.
Definitely. Okay, I think we had a very interesting presentation with you. And we are your presentation. But one thing which is very essentially coming out from your presentation is that even despite of the distance, one of the very lacking factors is the community, which is like you, because those people, those same people who are playing here and they are saying the needs are the third class people. So it is a kind of, because it's a process of alienation. I mean, they have been, if they would have it together from one location and shifted to another, I mean, together, in the totality, it would have been a different nature. So that is one of the things which is, thank you so much for
Thank you.